broadcast tonight, Korea's foreign minister addresses Japan's wartime use of sex slaves to the United Nations, calling for urgent action over Tokyo's refusal to accept responsibility. South Korea's defense ministry denounces North Korea's series of missile launches, saying they violate UN resolutions. We also take a look at the regime's missile capacity and capabilities. And plus, the fast-changing events in Ukraine. The army is on full combat alert, while fresh diplomatic efforts to avert a further escalation of the crisis are underway. With these stories and more next on ARIRANG News at 8. Good evening to our viewers in Korea, and hello to those of you who are watching from around the world. It's Wednesday, March 5th here in Seoul. I am Yun Byung-se. We begin this evening with Seoul's diplomatic efforts to address Japan's wartime sexual slavery issue. The South Korean Foreign Minister Yun Byung-se raised the unresolved matter of comfort women at the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva less than an hour ago. And for more on what he said, we are joined by our Hwang Sung-hee in the studio. Now, Sung-hee, fill us in.
Good evening, Ji-hye. Minister Yun Byung-se's speech at the UN Human Rights Council session was largely focused on urging Japan to take responsibility and to compensate the victims of its wartime sexual slavery. Now, speaking on the need to stop sexual violence in armed conflicts around the globe, Minister Yun said there are violations that took place in the past in which the perpetrators have yet to repent. Minister Yun said, quote, "Without repenting past wrongdoings, a brighter future will not be secured," and pointed to the so-called comfort women as a living evidence of such case. The South Korean diplomat said the comfort women issue is not just a bilateral issue between Japan and the victimized countries, but a universal human rights issue and an unresolved problem still haunting us today. Minister Yun called on the international community to urge the Japanese government to take responsibility and to educate its current and future generation with regard to the comfort women issue. Now, this is the first time since 2006 that Seoul's top diplomat is attending the UN Human Rights Council session, and the first time ever that the comfort women issue has been raised. An estimated 200,000 women, mostly Korean, were used as sex slaves by the Japanese army in the early 20th century, and many are still waiting for a heartfelt apology from Japan.
For Sung-hee, Korea and Tokyo relations, I mean, it are at the worst in recent years. How toxic are their ties?
Well, let's put it this way, Ji-hye. It's been a year since President Park Geunhye took office, and she has yet to sit down for bilateral summit talks with her Japanese counterpart. President Park has been critical of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe for his nationalistic stance and his tendency to glorify Japan's World War II history rather than taking responsibility for the country's wartime crimes. Her latest warning came last Saturday on the anniversary of the 1919 uprising in Korea against Japanese colonial rule, where she said a leader who fails to acknowledge mistakes cannot open a new future. Her speech also came a day after Japan said it would review a landmark apology it issued in 1993 to the comfort women. The apology, dubbed the Kono Statement after then Chief Cabinet Secretary Yohei Kono, acknowledged for the first time that so-called comfort women were forced to serve in army brothels. But Tokyo said last week it would set up a panel to review the evidence on which that apology was based, with nationalist politicians in Japan calling the women's accounts a total lie.
Now, going back to Yoon's speech again, did he also mention dire human rights conditions in North Korea?
That's right, Ji-hye. Minister Yun talked about the UN's recent investigation into the North Korea's human rights abuses, expressing hope that it will make practical measures for improving the human rights conditions in the reclusive regime. The South Korean diplomat called on all nations to stop the forced repatriation of North Korean refugees who have left their country in search of freedom and to ensure their safety. Minister Yun also talked about war-separated families and wartime abductees, calling it one of the most serious humanitarian tragedy today, and urged North Korea to cooperate in solving the issue and begin by holding reunions for such families on a regular basis.
All right, Sung-hee, thank you very much for that report. And that was our Hwang Sung-hee reporting live on Foreign Minister Yun Byung-se's address to the UN in Geneva. Seoul's push to have regular reunions for families separated by the Korean War is now in writing. South Korea made a proposal to the North on this Wednesday, asking for talks over the urgent humanitarian issue. But as our Kim Ji-yeon reports, the early speculation is that Pyongyang will turn the offer down.
Seoul's Unification Ministry sent a written proposal to Pyongyang on Wednesday, suggesting that the two Koreas hold talks on making reunions for families separated by the Korean War a regular event. Deputy spokesperson Park Geunhye said the ministry proposed holding a round of working-level Red Cross talks next Wednesday on the South Korean side of Panmunjom, which is located on the de facto border between the two Koreas. The offer follows President Park Geunhye's call for regular family reunions during a speech on March 1st, where she pointed out that tens of thousands of South Koreans remain on a waiting list to see their long-lost loved ones in the north. The last round of reunions 2 weeks ago were the first in more than 3 years. Pyongyang has yet to respond to Seoul's proposal. Local media outlets in Seoul say Pyongyang is likely to reject the offer and instead make a counter-proposal for working-level talks where other unresolved cross-border issues could be discussed, such as a resumption of tours to the North's Mount Kungang Resort and the lifting of economic sanctions on North Korea. Experts say Pyongyang is likely to respond to Seoul's proposal after joint military exercises between Seoul and Washington end on Thursday. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
Well, South Korea may have made friendly overtures about family reunions, but North Korea's provocative actions aren't being overlooked. Seoul's defense ministry lashed out at Pyongyang for its rocket launch on Tuesday, a move, it said, violated UN Security Council resolutions. Our defense ministry correspondent Kim Hyun-bin reports.
South Korea's defense ministry said Wednesday that the previous day's rocket launches were a violation of UN Security Council resolutions, as the North did not notify anyone of the event in advance, and the missiles jeopardized a commercial Chinese airliner flying through North Korean airspace.
This is a violation of UN Security Council resolutions, and it has threatened the safety of a commercial airliner. Pyongyang should stop its provocations and abide by international standards.
Defense Ministry spokesperson Kim Min-seok labeled the launches as explicit acts of aggression against a series of ongoing military exercises by South Korea and the U.S., adding that Seoul is keeping a close watch on the possibility of additional provocations to come. The missiles were short-range KN-02 ballistic missiles, and military sources in South Korea said Wednesday the North has around 100 of the missiles in its arsenal. The missiles can load up to 400 kilograms of explosives and chemical weapons, and dozens of missiles can be launched in minutes. The KN-02 has a maximum range of 170 kilometers and can hit a target at that distance in less than 4 minutes, posing a huge threat to the Seoul metropolitan area. It is thought that 30 KN-02 missiles are mounted on mobile launch pads and have Seoul in their crosshairs. North Korea has recently developed a multiple rocket launcher called the KN-09, which is presumed to have a target distance of 200 kilometers. That means that missiles shot from the border could reach Kaesongdae, where the joint military bases of South Korea's Army, Air Force, and Navy headquarters are located. The Pentagon said Tuesday in its latest strategy document that North Korea poses a growing threat to the United States because of its pursuit of long-range missiles and nuclear weapons development. The U.S. Defense Department said the U.S. military will keep up its investment in missile defense while maintaining a major presence in the region. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
And meanwhile, North Korea is justifying its recent series of missile and rocket launches as defensive in nature. A statement released by the North Korean People's Army on Wednesday said the missile and rocket tests that started last week were conducted to protect the nation's airspace and territory. It added that the ongoing joint South Korea-U.S. military exercises are provocative and that Pyongyang would fire off its strongest rocket if it feels threatened. North Korea has fired off a number of Scud missiles and short-range projectiles using multiple rocket launchers over the past week and a half.
For the latest news that impacts Korea and the world, join Yoo Ji-hye for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
The Korean government has unveiled its to-do list that aims to help carry out the ambitious 3-year economic innovation plan. Some 60 tasks focused on balancing domestic demand and exports, boosting the R&D sector, and reforming public organizations. ARIRANG's Hwang Sung-hee has the details.
A total of 59 detailed tasks will back up the Korean government's 3-year economic innovation plan. Finance Minister Hyun Ho-seok said during an economy-related ministers' meeting on Wednesday that they focus on removing excessive red tape in the name of growth and bolstering sluggish corporate investment. To accomplish the latter and boost venture businesses, the government first plans to offer bigger tax breaks for so-called angel investors, those who invest in startups. For example, angel investors would not be taxed for investments of up to 15 million won, or roughly $14,000 starting next year through 2017. The government also plans to provide financial support worth $880 million for 500 small and medium-sized businesses every year starting in 2015. Hyun said that the government is drawing up a package of measures aimed at easing regulations that hamper active participation of private equity funds in the mergers and acquisition market. The government will go through the tasks in an economy-related ministers' meeting that takes place every week. It would also set up a separate task force team to monitor how well the tasks are being achieved. Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News.
President Park Geunhye has appointed 4-term lawmaker Lee Ju-young as the new Minister of Oceans and Fisheries. The presidential office of Cheongwade says President Park approved a parliamentary committee's hearings report on Wednesday, which makes Lee's appointment official. Former Fisheries Minister Yun Byung-se was dismissed early last month over inappropriate remarks and actions concerning an oil leak off Korea's south coast. Some positive numbers on the economic front. Korea's shipbuilding industry solidified a smooth start to the year. It logged the most global orders in February for the second consecutive month. UK-based Clarkson Research Service said Wednesday that Korean shipbuilders won orders accounting for nearly 1.4 million compensated gross tons last month, up 20% from the same month last year. With that, Korean shipbuilders now control roughly 45% of the global market. The pickup is attributed to Korean shipbuilding companies winning more contracts for larger, more expensive fleets, such as container vessels and LNG-fueled ships. Now, Koreans who are raised or even born in a country outside of Korea are commonly referred to as gyopos in Korean. The number of them returning to make a life for themselves in their homeland is increasing by the year. In fact, recent data shows gyopos now make up nearly 15% of all foreigners in the country. Economy met some of them.
Byung-ho Jian, or Byungse as she's known here in Korea, is receiving her scholarship to study in Korea. She's a Korean Chinese who came from China just 7 months ago.
I'll be studying law at Seoul University.
The scholarship given by the Overseas Korea Foundation to dozens of foreign nationals of Korean descent not only gave Byung a chance to come to Korea for the first time in her life, it also gave her better opportunities to study in her field of choice.
I found that there are more advanced and developed courses in the area of law that I wanted to study here in Korea than in China.
And she's not the only one making the move to the motherland. According to recent data from the Ministry of Justice, the number of foreign nationals of Korean ethnicity surpassed the 200,000 mark for the first time last year. That's a 24% increase from the year before.
The record number comes from the increasing number of Korean Chinese citizens coming to Korea. In 2008, immigration laws were amended to give Korean Chinese citizens living here similar benefits to Korean citizens, including being allowed to own property and have health insurance.
In 2013, more than 67% were Korean Chinese. The second and third largest group were the Korean Americans, making up 19%, and the Korean Canadians, who made up nearly 6%. And for the most part, many come to Korea for the jobs.
There's definitely greater interest among overseas Koreans to live in Korea because Korea has become globalized with many new employment opportunities.
And taking advantage of opportunities is what one Korean American is doing.
This is vatos.
31-year-old Kenny Park uses American influences and Korean ethnic background to start a Mexican fusion restaurant in Seoul.
Growing up in California, we just have a really vast array of food that's available to us. But when that Korean taco truck trend started to really boom, I kind of woke up one day and was like, hey, why don't we introduce this Korean taco trend in Korea as opposed to doing it in America.
The popular restaurant has grown, expanding to 3 locations in the span of 2 years.
I think Korea is it's such an underrated place to do business and to live as an expat or as a gyokbo. And I think the opportunities are really abundant here.
Connie Lee, ARIRANG News.
Over now to the latest on the Ukraine crisis. A series of diplomatic efforts to quell a further escalation of the standoff is underway. Leaders from Russia and the West are set to meet on Wednesday, while Russia and the U.S. will take on the same day as well. Connie Kim reports.
With an aim of easing tensions over the Ukraine crisis, Russia has agreed to meet with NATO on Wednesday in Brussels. It'll be the first public contact between Moscow and the military alliance since Russian forces moved into Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula. Further south in Europe on Wednesday in Paris, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will hold talks for the first time since the unrest in Ukraine erupted. The two will be meeting on the sidelines of a special conference that aims to help Lebanon cope with the influx of Syrian refugees. Before traveling to France, Kerry stopped in Kiev in a show of support for the country's interim government. Afterward, Kerry slammed Russia's deployment of troops to Crimea as an act of aggression, but added that the U.S. is not looking for a confrontation.
In the streets today, I didn't see anybody who feels threatened, except for the potential of an invasion by Russia. So I would hope that President Putin, who is insisting against all evidence everywhere in the world about troops being in Crimea, that they're not there, that he will step back and listen carefully, that we would like to see this de-escalated.
During his short trip to Kiev, Kerry offered an economic and technical loan package worth $1 billion to help Ukraine's new government. The United States also plans to send technical advisors to Ukraine to get the country's economy back on track. Meanwhile, in Russia, the Defense Ministry confirmed that it had successfully test-fired an intercontinental ballistic missile Tuesday. Although the test was planned before the current crisis in Ukraine and the U.S. was notified beforehand, it adds to the undercurrent of tensions between Russia and the West. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
And taking it now to China, the country opened its annual National People's Congress on Wednesday morning. At the start of the 10-day meeting, the military budget was given a boost and the economic growth target was retained. Shin Se-min has more.
China has unveiled its master plan for the year, and it includes a bigger military budget and a stable economic growth target. The figures were announced on Wednesday, the first day of an annual legislative session of the National People's Congress. Beijing will boost its military defense budget by 12.2% to about $131 billion. That percentage is greater than that of total government expenditure, which will rise 9.5% this year. The fatter defense budget comes as Chinese President Xi Jinping seeks to create a stronger military amid heightened tensions in the East Asian region. Xi is making a statement by raising the defense budget that he wants to make China a maritime power while strengthening border and air defenses. It follows Beijing's declaration in November of an air defense identification zone over the East China Sea that enraged neighboring countries. With regard to economic growth, last year's target of 7.5% was retained. The world's second-largest economy grew 7.7% last year, its worst rate of growth since 1999. The 7.5% target for this year might make it difficult to achieve Beijing's goals of curbing credit risks and solving the nation's pollution problem. But Premier Lee Keung-chang said smog would be a priority, describing the issue as a red light warning against inefficiency. The full session of the Congress will run for a total of 9 days, during which corruption, pollution, and regional issues will be addressed. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
And turning now to more global news updates. From the driest month in Singapore in over 140 years to Brazil, marking 100 days until the World Cup, we turn things over to our Paul Lee at the News Center. Paul, Southeast Asia has been dealing with some extreme weather conditions over the last few weeks, where rain would be a welcome guest. What can you tell us?
Hello, Ji-hye. An intense wave of dry heat has been battering many countries in Southeast Asia over the past few months. Singapore's National Environment Agency announced Wednesday that the country is suffering one of its worst dry seasons in history, with February being its driest month since 1869. The prolonged drought has spread to other nations, including Malaysia and Indonesia, where authorities have already enacted water conservation measures. Experts say the dry spell threatens to further raise the price of food and have a negative effect on the already sensitive emerging economies. But relief may be on the way, as the intermonsoon season is set to begin at the middle of this month and run through early May. And over in the United States, President Barack Obama has submitted an annual budget blueprint for the 2015 fiscal year that features a focus on fighting poverty. The $3.9 trillion budget proposal calls for a raise in the minimum wage and more spending on infrastructure, while also reducing the budget deficit by over $650 billion over the next decade. Obama said it was all about strengthening the middle class.
Good morning, everybody. As I said at the outset, our budget is about choices. It's about our values. As a country, we've got to make a decision if we're going to protect tax breaks for the wealthiest Americans or if we're going to make smart investments necessary to create jobs and grow our economy and expand opportunity for every American.
Obama, however, is expected to face strong resistance from getting the budget passed by the Republican-controlled House of Representatives. Heading over to South America, stadiums and major landmarks across Brazil were lit up in a dazzling display of its national colors on Tuesday as the country celebrated the start of the 100-day countdown to the World Cup. Brazil is currently racing against time to finish construction of sports venues, airports, and key infrastructure. Recent polls show public support for the games falling to an all-time low due to excessive spending. Despite the concerns, many residents in the capital city remain in high spirits.
Having Americana all lit up on this path that I walk almost every day is important. It's beautiful. I think for people from Rio de Janeiro, the World Cup is more important since we have the final here and Brazil should be the winner. We deserve this victory after all our struggles.
The World Cup is scheduled to kick off on June 12 in the city of Sao Paulo, with Team Brazil playing Croatia. That's all from me for now, but I'll be back with more updates in just about 2 hours.
And time to get a check on the weather with our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung, it feels like we've bounced back to winter.
Gia, I absolutely agree. It's currently 2 degrees here in Seoul, but the cold, strong winds make it feel like it's -3. Taking a closer look at the current conditions, well, some parts of the East Coast regions are seeing snow showers due to winds blowing from the west to east. And so far, about 10 centimeters of snow has piled up in the East Coast regions, and about 1 more centimeter will fall through later tonight. A cold wave warning has been issued in Gangwon-do province, so if you're in that region, please be sure to dress warmly. Other than that, let's hang in there a bit longer because we will get back to our seasonal average temperatures over the weekend. Moving on to Thursday's readings, Seoul starts off the day at -4 degrees with a high of 6. Daegu and Gwangju reach 8. As for other regions, Daejeon and Jeju also make it to 8 degrees, while Dokdo tops out at 2. That's all for now, but please be sure to check your latest weather update after 10.
And that brings us to the end of our newscast. I'm Yoo Ji-hye in Seoul. I'll be back with more news updates on our primetime news at 10 p.m. Korea time. See you then.